It's January, it's a new year, and it's that sort of time to be setting some goals for your garden. So I thought I'd share some of the goals that I've set for myself that may inspire you to look at what you'll be doing later on this year too. And in this episode I thought I'd also share some of the things that you can be doing despite the weather not being particularly nice. This year I plan to go into the growing season a lot more prepared than I have in previous years. Prepared not just in terms of the equipment and the garden itself, but in terms of my planning. So I intend to plan for abundance this year. I really want to set a goal that means that over the course of the rest of this year, the majority of my salad and vegetables will be coming from my garden. Setting a goal with an outcome like this really gives me a lot to think about in terms of how I intend to work throughout the year. And thinking about keeping on top of key tasks, that means that I should hopefully have enough food to keep myself and my family in those vegetables and salads for the remainder of the year. When I say plan for abundance, what I'm talking about is how I'm going to maximise the use of the land available to me to produce food for myself and my family. And if I have a little bit left over, my friends too. This year, I'm really lucky to have my home kitchen garden and also my allotment as well. So I'm looking at how I'm going to sequentially sow the times I really need to be doing those things and maximising the use of that land so that over the year I have huge amounts of food available to me, and hopefully some of that I'll also be able to store into the colder months. I'm also hoping to have an abundance of flowers as well in my garden. It's something I've really wanted to do, is to bring colour, smells and wildlife friendly plants into my garden, which will be a benefit to my kitchen garden as well, but also just to the local ecology. Plants and flowers can be really expensive, so this year I'm intending to sow and grow as much as I can at home. I do have a very limited amount of space for nursery growing, so I'm going to have to try and plan this out and think about how I'm going to protect those young seedlings as they grow and get ready to go out into the flower beds. Flowers will bloom at different times of the year, so I really do need to sit down and think about what it is I'm sowing and why and when they will be showing their flowers throughout the year. Because each season I want to make sure I've got an abundance of colour, smells and interest in the garden throughout the year. So that's really going to take some planning and some thinking. So to start, I'm going to be auditing what I already have, so I can start to build my own database of plants I have in my garden now. Unfortunately, I don't really know enough about plants to be able to name a plant just by looking at it. So I'm using an app on my phone called Nature ID to help me do that. It's not going to be 100% accurate all the time, but it's going to get me close enough so that if I need to, I can go online and hopefully narrow down the type of plant that I have in my garden. While I'm auditing and trying to identify the plants I already have in my garden, I'm going to start to draw out the flower beds that I have and mark out where those plants are currently living. Now I may need to move some of them, so that will be the baseline for my planning, and I'll need to keep an updated plan of where those plants are over time. I'm also going to make sure that I label those plants as I go. There's nothing worse than thinking I'll remember that and in a few months' time I have no idea what that plant was and have to start again. So I'm going to try and be really systematic in how I do this. I'm also going to try and start keeping a log this year. I know it sounds quite a lot, but it's just going to be a bullet point list of things that I've done, things I've planted, where I've planted them, just so I've got something to think about and reflect on later on in the year. So next year I can try and improve on the things I've done this year. If you're anything like me, you won't like January. It's cold, it's generally wet here in the UK, and it's just not nice to be outside. And we do have some really hard frosts at the moment, which makes digging the ground almost impossible. So There are some jobs that you can actually get on with this time of the year, which means that you're not necessarily out in the cold so much, but also will mean that when it comes to sowing later on this year, you'll be ready for it and not rushing to catch up. So the first job I'm going to encourage you to do is sort and clean your pots. A lot of the pots that I have, and you may be in the same position as me, are pots that I've got from nurseries with plants that I've purchased over the years. Now, these aren't made of the best quality plastic, they're not great for recycling, but if you've used them in your garden for a couple of years, they're probably going to be damaged at some point. So it's worth getting hold of those and getting rid of them. Having pots of different sizes are pretty useful because you can use them for potting on and starting to separate plants as they grow. As you can see here, got some that are pretty small but would be good for a new plant that's just come out of the seed tray, and all the way onto these bigger ones, which will be pretty good for larger sizes just before putting into the garden or for selling on. So lots of different sizes available. Luckily, our local garden centre will take those pots. They have a recycling bin for them out the back, so I can take them there rather than putting them into landfill. So if you can, try and take them back to the nurseries where they can hopefully either recycle or dispose of them in a better way than we can. If you have pots that still have some life in them, please make use of them. It's better to use them in your garden each year if you can, rather than putting them into landfill. Plastic isn't great, but it is quite durable, so hopefully you'll get a few years out of them. But make sure they're clean, because they can carry disease from one year to the next. So I'm going to go through my pots and make sure that they're in good order, that they're not broken, they're definitely worth using this year, and that they're clean. To clean the pots that I'm going to be keeping, I'm just going to use hot soapy water, nothing special for this, and hopefully that just means that I'll be reducing any risk of infection and disease on any of the plants I grow in these pots this year. And buying new ones if you need them is a really good task for this time of the year. It gets you out of the cold, it keeps you in the warm, and it also means that you're ready with the seeds for when the temperatures start to rise. Seeds do have a shelf life, so do look at the date that's on there. It's either going to be an expiry date or it's going to be a packaging date. Seeds don't tend to do very well and don't have great germination rates after about a year or so, particularly if they're being exposed to moisture and ranges of temperature. So if you haven't stored them particularly well and they've been open, it might just be worth getting rid of those seeds and replacing them with more viable seeds this year. Seeds don't last forever, and if you're going to use old seeds, you'll probably find that your germination rate is much lower than you would hope for. So it's really important to make sure that when you're buying those seeds, you're getting as much time as possible with them and making sure you use them as quickly as possible. It's not always easy to do that, as some seed packets come with hundreds of seeds in them, probably a bit too much for individuals to use, but you can share them out amongst your friends and family. In the UK, seed packets do need to come with dates on them. They're usually either a sow-by date or a package date. If it's a package date, you really want to be trying to use them within the first year or two of getting them. But if you've got ones that have been nicely sealed and they've got a sow-by date on them, then try and make sure you use them by then. Once you go past it, you might still be able to germinate a few, but as time passes, germination rates will reduce. So these flowers here need to be sown by December 2026. But once I've actually opened them, that time limit will start to reduce. So don't think that if you've opened them and you haven't stored them well, that they'll still be viable up till December 26. I store my seeds in a sealable box. Now, it's not the best one in the world, but it does the job. You want to keep this in a relatively stable temperature environment. I tend to keep it in my garage, but I have unfortunately left it in this greenhouse over time. So sometimes unfortunately it does get too hot, which again will affect the germination rates and the viability of the seeds. So if you are going to store it in something like this, make sure it keeps into a relatively consistent climate. I've been going through my seeds and splitting them down into the times that they need to be sown, and also trying to remove any packaging that's out of date and has been opened and been left open for a while. You can see I've got some lettuce seeds and other seeds here, quite a pile of seeds actually, where I've opened and partly used them, and whilst some of them might still be in date, like this one here, December 25, the viability of that is going to start to reduce. I may still try to grow some of these, but I won't have huge expectations for them. As I've gone through the seeds, I've started grouping them together in terms of the periods which they'll be sown together. So this is a group that starts in February, got another pack that starts in March, and then some that starts in May, and even some all the way through to September as well. I have got some seed packets where I've opened them in previous years and the use by date is this year. I'm going to give them a go, but like I said before, I'm going to manage my expectations on those. For my salad seeds, I'm looking to use heritage and heirloom varieties, and that's because I'm just really interested in potentially saving my own rather than having hybrids, and I'm purchasing them from a company called Real Seeds. They can be found online and they do supply across the UK. You can get seeds from multiple different places. You can get them from magazines, supermarket, DIY stores and garden centres, or online suppliers. You may find that seeds from some of those suppliers may not be the best because they may not have looked after them as well. In general, I find seeds from magazines don't do quite as well as those bought from suppliers such as your garden centre, just because the way that they've potentially been stored then may not have been looked after in the best way. But it doesn't mean that it's not worth doing, because you also get a magazine with huge amounts of information in there as well. Because I'm planning and growing with abundance in mind, I'm trying to keep a database of all of the plants and seeds that I am growing and sowing. That way I've got a record of them and I can think about next year whether or not I want to use that seed and that seed supplier again. I'm using Notion for this. I'm starting to learn how to program it correctly, but I've really got a nice database going at the moment. So I'm hoping that as that develops, I'll give you some insights into that as well, and maybe you'd want to use that for your own planning for next year. The one thing I am sowing this time of the year is onions. I've always grown them from sets before, but I really want to increase the amount that I am growing now that I've got my allotment. So that means I'm going to sow them because I can do hundreds rather than 20 or 30 of them. So I'm really looking forward to those. Onions are a really good plant to grow at home. They are pretty hardy and they also store extremely well. So they're something that you can grow in your own kitchen garden and enjoy, particularly through the colder months. I will be multi-sowing them, so there will be between 5 and 6 onions per grouping, and I'm hoping that way I can get more from the space I have over in my allotment. Multi-sowing is a really good technique if you've got limited space available or you want to maximise the space you have. It's a technique where you put multiple seeds into the same station and they grow to maturity together, and hopefully you should be able to harvest them together as well. So that's what I'm going to be doing with my onions. So I'm getting around about 120 seeds per seed tray, and that hopefully will keep me in onions for the rest of this year once I've been able to harvest them. Sowing 2 varieties of onion today. First one is the white onion, and this is Bedfordshire Champion, and my red onion, which is Red Baron. So these both can be sown in February and should do pretty well. I'm going to try and do my best to get 5 seeds per station, and they should grow up quite nicely together and hopefully give me a really good harvest this year. Once all the seeds are in, the last job is just to cover them over with just enough soil which is around about the height of the seeds themselves, and give them a good water as well. Those onion seeds are good for sowing this time of the year all the way through till early March indoors in a greenhouse like this, which is why I've stuck them up here to keep them away from the frost. If you want to sow directly into the ground, you're looking really late March into April, and then hopefully if you've sown them indoors and they're looking good, they should be able to get out into the ground around about sort of May time. That means harvesting in August and September, so hopefully that means we'll have a really good crop of onions ready for next winter. So I hope this has been helpful. I wish you all the best with your planning and your growing this year. If you like this type of content, please like and subscribe. It really helps the channel out, and I'll see you next time.
Don't leave me behind. time.